To order the meeting of the Planning Board for September 16th, 2024. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can we please have a roll call?
Member Ray?
Here.
Member Perry?
Here.
Member Angelides?
Here.
Member Grocott?
Here.
Member Hubbard?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay. I would like to move on to approval of the agenda. Do we have any amendments to the agenda as proposed?
I don't have anything to add. I just want to welcome our new members. So we have Sean Way, we have Cindy Perry, and Terry Grocott. So welcome. We have our two seasoned members, Sam and David. So we just appreciate you volunteering your time and being part of this board. So welcome.
Thank you. Member Grocott, you had discussion item for agenda? Okay, all right. I would like to modify the agenda if I can with some additional discussion items. First one, I would like to discuss continuing to be designated as the liaison to the city and commission on behalf of the board for my intent to advance the comp plan and development code efforts that we've undertaken. So I would not be expressing opinions of board members, just going to the meetings, interacting with the city to encourage this process to continue. I would like to add an item to discuss the current state of the comp plan consultant statement of work, and I would like to add an additional item to discuss where we're at with the Historic Preservation Board changes and what those next steps are. I would like to, that's it. All right. Are you all in agreement to add these?
Yeah, Sharon, I just have a question. With those discussion items, does that happen before we head into the local planning agency? After the action items after 4? Are those discussion items, or do we add them on at the end of the agenda?
Let's add them on at number 7 where it says discussion items.
Okay.
So reconvene as planning board to do that part?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's the direction. I just wanted to make sure.
Okay. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Member Perry?
Yes.
Member Angelides?
Yes.
Member Grocott?
Yes.
Member Ray?
Yes.
Member Hubbard?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay. Approval of minutes is the next item. Do we have any changes to the minutes?
I do have a question on that.
Okay.
In the minutes, it said there was a summary of the SWAT discussion that went to board members. I presume they mean previous board members, and are we able to get copies of that for the new board members?
Brandon, would that be a question for you? Can we obtain that? And
we could definitely send that over.
okay. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
Move to approve the minutes.
And a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Member Angelides?
Yes.
Member Grocott?
Yes.
Member Ray?
Yes.
Member Perry?
Yes.
Member Hubbard?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, first action item
I think we
4A.
skipped audience comment.
Oh, I'm sorry. I did. We will open the floor for audience comment. None? Okay. I'm sorry. We will move on to 4A, election of officers. I would like to nominate myself for being the chair if there are no objections.
Yep.
So, okay. I will need a motion to appoint me as the chair.
I motion to appoint David as chair of the planning board.
I second.
Roll call, please.
Member Grocott?
Yes.
Member Ray?
Yes.
Member Perry?
Yes.
Member Angelides?
Yes.
Member Hubbard?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. And who would like to be vice chair? Okay.
Motion to appoint Sam as a vice chair.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Member Ray?
Yes.
Member Perry?
Yes.
Member Angelides?
Yes.
Member Grocott?
Yes.
Member Hubbard?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. And so at this point, we need to adjourn as the planning board and reconvene as the local planning.
4A, 4B,
Oh,
planning board.
I'm
meeting.
sorry. First time.
You're doing fine.
Okay, action item 4B, planning board meeting dates for 2025 calendar year. Does anyone have changes they would like to suggest? I do. I will be out of town for the February and March dates, so I'm flexible around both of those months. Just if there's no objection to, I don't know if anyone has a preference for going earlier in February, like the 10th, or later in the week of the 24th.
Doesn't matter to me.
10th is Monday, yeah.
The 10th works.
10th, okay. And March 17th.
Can you tell me what date that
Oh,
was?
Yes, the February meeting we would like to move to February 10, 2025.
Okay. February 10th. Got it.
March, similar situation. I'm traveling on the 17th and 24th. Could we move that to the 10th? Okay. We would like to move the March meeting to March 10, 2025. Is it? Oh.
Want to meet on St. Patrick's Day anyways.
Oh, all right.
Corey may be busy, so.
The 17th is
Okay. Yeah, so can I get a motion to make those changes?
Motion to approve the board meeting dates as amended.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Member Angelides?
Yes.
Member Grocott?
Yes.
Member Ray?
Yes.
Member Perry?
Yes.
Chair Hubbard?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay. Now we are ready to adjourn as a planning board and reconvene as the local planning agency. Okay. So the first item is the 5A, ordinance 2024-03. And I'll need some guidance on this part. How do I proceed at this point?
Do we want to do staff presentation, or how's that going to work?
Yeah, Brenda can present the,
Good afternoon. If we could pull up the PowerPoint, thank you. So this is ordinance 2024-03. This is a privately initiated request. There are two changes that are requested under this ordinance. The first is to allow attached single family as a residential development type in the resort facilities medium district. The second is to allow lot coverage to be calculated at the attached single family zoning lot level rather than at the individual parcel level, and I'll go into a bit of detail on both of these. So the associated project, the applicant is present, Eli Payne, for Smiley Snack Shack, St. Pete Beach. This is a property that is owned at 3700 Gulf Boulevard. It is a companion request to this project. The plat itself is not part of the request being reviewed tonight, but these items will move forward together to the City Commission. The plat was reviewed late last month by the Board of Adjustment, and it was recommended to the City Commission at a vote of 5-0. This is a request to construct townhomes at the property. It would be a complete site redevelopment, and you can see the arrangement of the lots there. I believe I have a better graphic coming up, but those green lines show the parcels that are proposed, and then the remaining of land, the driveway and the other green space outside of those parcels would be a common ownership by the homeowners association of those 4 units. So the first request is an amendment to Division 14 Resort Facilities Medium District. Under permitted principal uses and structures, this would add attached single family as a residential dwelling type. The city does allow for residential development in the Resort Facilities District. However, we only allow for multifamily, and the city does distinguish between multifamily, which would be an apartment or a condo style development, and attached single family, which would allow for that fee simple subdivision of individual lots to allow for ownership with an overall tract. There's a minimal expected impact from this request. In the past, back in 2003, when the city went through its citywide rezoning, the majority of the beach resort parcels were zoned resort facilities medium, where this change is proposed. That included almost all of the large resort district and almost all of the properties south of the county parking lot down to 37th Avenue, excluding the subject property as well as the property just immediately to the north of it. Also what is now known as the bioresidential district. In 2008 and 2011, the city made major amendments to its zoning code and to its zoning map, and most of those parcels were taken out of the resort facilities medium district and placed into the new community redevelopment district zoning categories. There are presently 11 developments that are remaining in the resort facilities medium district. Of them, only the property that is associated with this request, as well as the Don Cesar Hotel, are not condominiumized. Those properties that are condominiums are typically looked at as unlikely to redevelop due to the hurdles that are associated with that redevelopment. And so expected immediate impact outside of the associated request is fairly low. I did want to mention that this request only offers a different residential development type. It does not increase density, intensity, height, or other development standards. The applicant had originally come forward with this project earlier this year to develop it as a resort timeshare type development. They did decide to instead operate it as residential, but the development itself has not changed. The building, the height, the layout on the lot has not changed. They're just seeking to develop and have it available for residential, long-term rentals, or long-term homeownership purposes. Moving on to the second request, for attached single family specifically in our subdivision division of our land development code, lot coverage is looked at the individual parcel level. So going back to the subdivision that's being proposed, each of those 4 individual parcels that contain a residential unit currently under the code are required to maintain 30% permeability on the lot. And I'll show a graphic in a second, but the center 2 units do not meet that threshold. The outer units appear to. The applicant is seeking to change the code to allow for that calculation to be made at the zoning lot level, so that the entire parcel wide level, they would be responsible for maintaining 70% impervious or less, 30% permeable at that zoning lot full parcel level. And you can see that here in this graphic on the right. You look at those center 2 units, unit 2 and unit 3, they have the unit themselves. The east side is the driveway, which is not part of the parcel. The west side is under the unit owner's parcel, but it contains a balcony, it contains a pool and a small deck, and there is a small amount of green space further to the west just alongside the property line. However, these units do not meet that 70% maximum impervious. They do exceed that. So this would calculate the impervious ratio at the full parcel level, and they would be compliant at that level. This standard would apply to any townhome developments citywide. They are not very common in St. Pete Beach. We do have a handful that have been developed 15 to 20 years ago. There's no significant immediate impact that's anticipated. I did want to say this doesn't affect the parcel-wide impervious surface ratio limitation. It would just be the limitation that's placed on the individual units. It would be calculated at the entire parcel level, not the individual unit level. Staff has reviewed this request both relative to the comprehensive plan and the land development code. We do not take issue with either request. We do find them to be generally compliant with and supported by other language in the comprehensive plan and land development code. Staff recommends approval as requested. In terms of your action options, you're welcome to make a motion to recommend approval. If you feel that there should be modifications to this ordinance, but you ultimately wish to make approval recommendation, you're welcome to do that, or you can recommend denial to the City Commission for Ordinance 2024-03. The applicant is present. If you have any questions about what I just presented, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions?
What is the permeable rate for the 2 units as it stands now?
I don't have the exact number. I believe it's about 85 to 90% for those 2 parcels that I pointed out.
Does the driveway count as permeable surface?
No, it would be excluded. The city allows for a limited amount of permeable surface when it's, for example, if they were to use permeable pavers on a permeable base, a small portion of that could count toward the ratio, but the city requires 24% of the lot to be vegetative green space for any new development. So if the pool deck, for example, were to be permeable, they would be able to count a small portion of that, but ultimately about a quarter of the lot would need to remain green space.
So you're saying including the driveway, it's 70% for that entire parcel?
Yes, as I estimated it, and they will go through a site plan if this is ultimately approved, so they'll have to demonstrate that compliance.
So Brandon, this is going to apply across, moving forward. Is there, and this was kind of a science question, is there any impact on permeable surface when we look at mass versus volume? So when we start saying, we're going to take a larger lot and say as long as the larger lot has the 70%, is there any negative impact on that long term, do you think?
Ultimately, they're still responsible for stormwater requirements and overall permeability. What I could see this affecting, especially in larger townhome developments, if we were to ever see one of those moving forward, there's very little vacant land for that type of development, but if it were to occur, you might see a difference in how the lots are ultimately laid out. There might be less landscaping around the townhome unit itself and more toward the frontage, more toward the common space, just because this would allow for that to occur instead of it needing to be split up so that the units individually have that 30% permeability. But ultimately, the stormwater requirements would not change. They still have to retain the same amount of stormwater, so I wouldn't expect any change in that regard.
And saturation isn't impacted by how that 70% is laid out across a lot?
It could affect the local lot, especially if there's a lot of impermeable development toward the center, but ultimately they're still responsible for the same site-wide retention. They have to hold any development in St. Pete Beach that's new, has to hold a 25-year, 24-hour storm on the lot before it runs off either, in this case it would be to the storm drain, so that'd be their responsibility.
Is there a way to address this as a local one property as opposed to making a change that's citywide?
The second request would need to be a citywide change, barring any kind of change to the plan as they have it laid out. There would have been another option for the zoning request. There is the residential medium district just immediately south of here. They could have requested a rezoning to that. It would have probably required a future land use map amendment as well. They made this request as proposed, so but that they would have had an alternative for that part.
I guess one of the worries I have is any unintended consequences when you make it citywide. And I know we're talking about looking at our codes and things pretty soon, so I just didn't know if it made sense to make zoning changes right now.
Understood. I think with this would be outside that area of focus, at least as we've drafted the scope of the comprehensive plan. I did want to say for the request itself is really just, the residential is permitted for request number 1, and the type of development is permitted. It's just combining the two that the applicant's seeking to allow for. But I understand your concern.
Well, one of the things that in a townhouse type of situation is, it mentions in here that there would have to be some agreement around maintaining the green space or the permeable areas, but I did not see anything that I think about normally on a townhouse in terms of the external characteristics, like if these are all fee simple, could the owners make each one a different color or different roof, or, I mean, usually there's some kind of document with the HOA that calls for some type of consistency. And I don't know, does the city have that for townhouses, or does that need to be added to the ordinance to?
It's not part of this request because they're in the Resort Facilities Medium District. They're not in one of the city's design districts, so there are no design criteria to add. The applicant is present. He may know more about the homeowner association rules and what that'll entail, but that's not something we typically address for this type of development, at least in this location.
So, actually, I just had a thought. Typically, before this type of proceeding begins, the city attorney would have asked for disclosure of ex parte communications, and that affects me specifically. So can we proceed with that at this point?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we can go ahead and disclose any ex parte communications, which may include any written communications, site visits, any research that any of the board members may have done regarding this application.
Okay. Does anyone have anything to disclose?
I visited the site as well.
Okay. So my wife and I were at the El Agave Lounge Tequila Bar on Saturday, August 24th, and we interacted with the applicant and the project engineer who just happened to be there that same day. We spoke briefly about the project conceptually, but not about the business before the board today. Okay, so Brandon, my question is, the Land Development Code defines residential dwelling unit multifamily. I'm sorry, condominium is defined in the same way that the LDC uses multifamily in this case. And is it accurate that this could be developed in the exact same way as a condominium without this change being required?
It could. It's really down to the fee simple parcelization, the subdivision. That's what would be enabled by the townhome attached single family development. The city doesn't really have anything directly to do with condominiums. Apartments convert to condos all the time. That's really handled through the state. So they would be able to develop this building and go for condominiumization if they wanted. It's the fee simple parcelization. That's
okay. And it could also be developed as presented as apartments?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
So would the owner of the townhouse then own that parcel within the bigger parcel?
They would own one of the 4 parcels, and I don't know what the arrangement would be at this point. The applicant may know for how the proportion of ownership of the homeowner's lot would divvy up. But there would ultimately, on the city side, what we would be looking for, like Member Perry brought up before, there would need to be some kind of agreement that all of the unit owners would be responsible. Ultimately, if there were a code violation on the common tract, they would all need to be enforceably responsible for that tract. So.
Okay, I also wonder about just how renovation might look down the road for an individual unit in that.
Understood. Yeah, because this is outside a design district, we usually don't impose design standards on them, but the applicant may have something in mind for how they plan to
I mean, zoning purposes, you know, the permeability if they wanted to expand their townhouse.
Right. So it's still ultimately, it's a zoning lot, so we would treat this as one development.
Okay.
They would be individually owned, but ultimately we would be looking at permeability, and if there were to be any kind of shift of lot lines in the future, that is something that needs to go back to City Commission. So it is stricter than you would see in a typical neighborhood where we occasionally will have homeowners purchase the lot next to them and expand their home. That would not be an option here with townhomes. If there were to ever be a request to combine 2 or more of the townhomes or expand one out to take up a different portion of the parcel, that ultimately has to go back to City Commission. It is part of the plat. So.
Okay.
And would that apply as well to like exterior features such as pavers or things like that? If somebody wanted to expand their patio and it affected the overall permeability of the lot writ large?
It would be assessed at the whole parcel level. Now, if it stayed within their parcel lines, that might not necessarily need to be something that comes back for public hearing, but it would be reviewed at the parcel level for permeability.
So I saw in the, let's see, it was the, sorry, I'm looking through my notes here. The July 17th technical review, the applicant stated that the surrounding neighbors had pushed back on transient rentals, and they did a market analysis about converting it to a for sale product. So my read through our development code, it appears the way the city has enacted prohibition on short-term rentals is by way of defining that at the zoning district level in the permitted principal use definitions, and in this district there is no such prohibition. So regardless of this being a condo or single family attached, there would still not be a prohibition on short-term rentals. Is that accurate?
Correct. Now, they would have to go through a process of converting to a short-term rental if they were to do so. Of course, if there were any kind of homesteading on the property or anything like that, that would be lost. But currently, it's permitted to have residential, again, in a different arrangement, but also short-term rentals in this district. So they could choose either one. And they are voluntarily bringing this forward, so.
Okay. And in that same meeting, the city chief operating officer asked about letters of support from the Don Cesar Property Owners Corp. The response was, I'll have those support letters for what we're looking to do, 100%. The August 28th Board of Adjustment asked again for letters of support. None were provided. At this point, do we have letters of support?
I have not received them, but the applicant may speak.
One of your comments in your summary recommendation is some safeguards are put in place to ensure individual owners in the development are collectively responsible. How are those safeguards implemented? How are they included in this? If we make an ordinance change, they could show us everything we want to see here, but we still have that potential that loophole is left open. So it seems to me that if you're going to have some kind of HOA and they're going to have, there has to be a condition, or it has to be added somewhere to be there for the future.
And that is part of our land development code in the subdivision division. We do specify that there needs to be common responsibility at the property owner level for any changes to the tract or any kind of code violations on the tract. That would be something that we look at prior to final plat. We would have, we ask them for some kind of agreement. So,
but again, you're still talking about one property, and so I'm confident these people will give you what you need. I'm just afraid, you know, that 3 years from now nobody remembers, and the thing is written in a certain way that can be interpreted and completed in a certain way, and it doesn't address that future possibility. So how do we make our intent clear for everything across the city and not just this one property?
There could be an accompanying code change if the language isn't currently clear enough. I had felt that it had been, that it's the city's responsibility, staff's responsibility when we get to the final plat stage and ultimately to the site plan stage if this is approved, that is something that we need to look at. It's a document that would be recorded with the property that certifies that the individual property owners are responsible for the maintenance of the common tract.
And again, I'm concerned about the whole exterior, not just the whole appearance.
If we were to be looking at design standards, that would need to be a code change that would extend to the resort facilities district. Just north of here in the Boutique Hotel condo, we do have design standards, and you'll hear about that in the next case. Currently in resort facilities, we do not, so that there would need to be a separate code change for that.
Is there a reason that wouldn't be desirable to be consistent and, you know, make it clearer? I mean, I'm not struggling with what they're trying to do. I'm just struggling with how we are administering it.
Understood. It would be desirable. I would say that the applicant may already have a of course, they presented their design. We brought that to the Board of Adjustment. I don't think it was part of your packet, but they may already have some kind of homeowners association agreement that covers that part of it. They could speak to that, and if they don't have anything in mind, that might be something the board might want to consider.
And in addition to them speaking to it, we need to have some place that's referenced for anybody else that comes along several years from now.
Okay. Understood.
The only other question I had is, from a city code enforcement perspective, should the common area fall out of compliance, what does that look like from a violation perspective? How is that enforced when you've got 4 owners?
So that's part of the agreement, and ultimately it'll need to go through our attorney's office, but it would be some kind of either partial responsibility, some percentage-based, or some kind of joint responsibility for maintenance of that tract. So the citation would be to each of the 4 property owners to respond to the tract noncompliance.
Okay, so that HOA entity, they're the ones served with the violation, and the bylaws that have been enacted are how the enforcement happens.
Right, it would be the responsibility of the 4 owners too. Mm-hmm.
I have another question on your business impact estimate, and I'm not sure. Number 4 says additional information the governing body deems useful. And then it goes on to talk about this ordinance applies to all persons similarly situated, being property owners possessing a seawall, whether residential or commercial. And I didn't think there was any seawall at all involved with this.
No, there's not. I think that might have been a typo left over from another business impact statement.
Okay.
Sorry.
So you just clean that up?
Yes.
Does anyone have further questions for the city? Okay, can we hear from the applicant?
Good afternoon, Katie Cole with the law firm of Hill Ward Henderson, representing the applicant. Very good questions, and thank you. This is a unique request as it's a text amendment, and appreciate that you don't see very many citizen-initiated text amendments. So those are all very good questions that you all have asked to be concerned about the citywide impact of that. As Mr. Berry stated, the resort facilities medium category is very limited in nature. It's a small group of properties in this vicinity, and then an odd property to the south of this area. Most of these are, well, all of them are already developed, and as Mr. Berry's report said, unlikely to be redeveloped in this manner, and so this would be a limited impact change, which is why the applicant desired to move forward with a text amendment as opposed to a rezoning. Candidly, looking at the potential negative impacts to the neighbors of increasing the intensity of a land use and zoning change, this seemed like a more reasonable ask, because it's very specific to this project that has been already gone forward to Board of Adjustment. There are very few other citywide considerations. While you have raised them, the number of properties that are affected in resort facilities medium is so limited that it felt like this was the best way to limit the ask. The ask is exactly as Mr. Berry said. While this development is permitted in its form as it is now, it's not permitted in the ownership that the developer desires. And so the fee simple ownership gives, in our client's opinion, and based on their discussions with the neighborhood, gives the owners of the individual units a vested interest. There's only 4 units. They're very interested to work together. There will be, as Mr. Berry stated, your subdivision code requires a property owners association. If there is common property, that will exist and will be provided to the city as part of the platting process. I did want to share with you, while not pertinent to the request, I know it is of interest. If we can look at this. At the Board of Adjustment meeting when this project was originally approved prior to the plat moving forward, so this was the first Board of Adjustment meeting, there were conditions of approval stated that were specific to the design of the project and what it looked like, how the windows lined up, how large the garage doors were, et cetera. So your colleagues over at the Board of Adjustment were very intentional about that. As Mr. Berry stated, the likelihood of other significant townhome projects that would not have a common ownership or property association because it's required in your subdivision code would be unlikely.
Can I interrupt for one brief moment? I realize nobody asked me to swear in any of the people testifying. Would you like me to do that now?
Yes, please.
Okay. So if anybody is going to be testifying or providing information to the board, would you please stand and affirm that any information or factual representation you are giving to the board is truthful? Thank you.
Yes. The last thing I wanted to share was with respect to the Don Cesar Neighborhoods Association. The developer did have several email correspondence with them and conversations with their support. I apologize that those emails were not forwarded for your reference in the record, but they are there. I don't know if Allison, I don't see Allison here. So, but that did, and at the Board of Adjustment meeting last month, one of the members of the board is a member of that association and confirmed that. So that's on the record from that meeting as well. We would request your recommendation of approval for this change to the commission. The condominium form of ownership is a complex form of governing ownership, and this request is truly a form over substance, allowing for the owners to have the same type of unit, the same ownership rights without being burdened by the condominium form of ownership, and to make that facilitate that ownership. So Eli Payne, who's the engineer on the project, who worked with staff with respect to these specific changes, is also here and can speak to it, as well as the developer representatives, if you have any further questions. But with that, I'll just leave it and happy to answer any questions.
I don't want to be confrontational, but I will tell you part of where I'm coming from in terms of the future implications. A lot of the buildings were built 40s, 50s. I mean, I do think many of them over the next 10 years or so are something they're probably going to be torn down or replaced. I don't think it's as unlikely. Unlikely makes me nervous because I don't think it's unlikely. I think we need to think about the future.
Certainly.
So, like I said, I don't have any qualms about the proposal. I think it's if the homeowners like it, and I hope you will send us those letters, because I'm sure it'll come up again at the commission meeting or wherever it goes next. But I do think that we need to think through what we're doing for the future.
Certainly. Yeah, I don't know if you want to pull up Mr. Berry's PowerPoint. I think the zoning map showed, I didn't count the parcels. You probably know off the top of your head.
It's 11.
11 parcels. Yeah. So the resort facilities medium is 11 parcels.
I know where they are. That's why I'm saying
Yeah.
some of them are pretty old.
So you have those but those are under condominium form of ownership, which would obviously make it a bit more difficult for a redevelopment of those. So, any other questions?
That being the case, why is there not an interest in doing it as apartments?
As apartments, because home ownership is preferred.
Okay.
Having an investment in your own home is a preferred,
Okay.
as opposed to rentals.
I have mixed feelings on this. I certainly like the project. I also understand why the applicant would probably not want to change zoning districts to one that allows single-family attached, because their heights would decrease to 30 or 35 feet from 50 feet. So resort facilities medium sounds like what they would like to keep it. That being said, our board is tasked with maintaining the comp plan and the land development code. We've been trying to do this work for a year and a half, and not much progress has been made. So we were also given a strong advisement that it not be done haphazardly or without expert consultation. That's why we have executed a contract with a consultant on how to modify this plan properly without downstream effects that we might not anticipate. So I'm concerned that we're going to go and modify the LDC to fit one person's desired business model when they could build this project exactly the same as a condo or an apartment. And I understand homeownership, and I understand condos are more complicated, but at the same time, this seems like a very large ask that could have effects we're not anticipating because we're not experts in this area. I feel like I would want a independent land use attorney or our consultant to orchestrate a discussion with one to know that this will not backfire on the city in some way.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I think candidly that was what Mr. Berry's testimony and staff report included. Your staff did look at that. If you review the TRC minutes, and Ms. McMahon might want to speak to that as well, but that's certainly something that is always of a concern with text amendments, how to limit them and keep them most narrow, which is why I know that your professional staff here at the city did that thorough analysis.
Did that involve the consultant on the comp plan?
I think we can touch base with the consultant. They just signed the agreement, or I don't know if it's been fully executed, but before it goes to commission, that could be something that is included in our report.
I personally would lean towards denying this change until I hear that type of testimony. That's my personal opinion. I don't know how anyone else feels on the matter.
I feel there is potential for unintended consequences. I like what they're doing, but, I've already expressed my discomfort that this is a citywide change for a single property, and that's why I was asking, is there another way to do this that would be less long-term possible implications?
I like it, but I agree with you about speaking with the consultants.
Okay. Should
Just in
we?
case there's anything that we miss that could come up in future development.
Yeah, and I'm not opposed to having such a discussion. I don't feel like I know enough at this point to make an educated decision.
Does
So
the scope of the comp plan review involve this district?
No.
no.
So those consultants currently they're not being contracted to have discussions on this?
In the
Correct.
Pontiac District, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we could ask for the commission's opinion on if the statement of work could be modified to look at this one item. I don't know what their opinions on that would be. We'd have to have that conversation.
So this would only affect those 11 properties, correct?
Correct.
What are the existing, is this the 12th, or are there 11 addition, and what are on the other 10? Do we know? So, because what we're really considering is what's the impact on these specific 11 locations.
Mm-hmm.
So if the other 11 locations are in a position where they're not going to be redeveloped, or it's not likely to be redeveloped, I'm not sure how much of an impact this has.
Well,
If I may,
Mhm.
2 of the 10 are the Don Cesar Resort themselves, the resort and its associated parking. Then this, and then the
Could you
other-
pull that map back up again? Would you mind?
Oh, sorry, I was looking at the map.
So
It's the brown.
the brown and the northern
Yes.
part are the condos north of PCI, right?
Mhm.
But there's some on Upham Beach, is there not? And
The one parcel to the south there.
It's a different zone.
So I had the same thought. If it's 11 and most are already condos except for the parking lot, maybe it's not that big of a deal. But at the same time, I don't know what the process looks like for an entity asking to be zoned into RFM. So I don't know that it remains 11 or these 11. So that was one of those questions that
Fair point.
I can't answer. So
But that would have to come before the board as well.
Correct, yeah,
to be zoned in.
yeah, zoning changes would have to. But if there's precedent that suggests we should approve a zoning change because they meet all the criteria of the RFM district, perhaps we're encouraged to approve it. So I don't know. These are just all the questions that I feel like I want answers to before I could make such a decision.
If the city administration feels as though the consultant could answer this limited question, we would be happy to request the continuance to allow that to happen. But I don't know from a timing standpoint if it's even reasonable to expect them to answer that, to provide this analysis in addition to the staff analysis.
I don't know that we've met with them since Commission approved their contract at this point.
Well, I don't know either. I don't have that answer. At this point, I'm opposed to the change. So we can ask for a motion if anyone would like to make one.
Is there any way, the question I raised earlier, because I understand completely what you're saying, the wording as it exists right now, to me, it feels too broad, because I don't know what the unintended consequences could be. If there's a way to either narrow this to this one property by doing it another way, or to put the right conditions into the ordinance so that it just can't be interpreted in the future some way that wasn't intended. Because, like I said, I don't have an issue with what they're trying to do. I just have an issue with how it's being done.
What do you mean?
She's not opposed to the project as presented. She's opposed to the way they're trying to facilitate it being possible to execute. So land development code change, she's not in agreement with, but the project itself, and I feel the same way. I from what I've read, I like the project, but we're not here to look at a CUP request. We're here to evaluate a land development code change, and those are two different things.
So the concern is that if something like this happened in the future because of this change, we wouldn't review it, it would just pass, right?
Yeah, I just don't know what this will cause downstream.
Yeah.
The changes would encompass the townhouse or single-family resident, joining single-family residence, or allotting the density to the entire plot, not just the individual units.
And that's the permeability.
But there's two changes that are being requested. The first is for single-family attached, which doesn't change the design or the building itself. If they build it as condos, it stays the same.
Mhm.
It's just the ownership of the units, how the ownership changes.
Correct.
And
yeah.
then the second would be the permeability. So the concern with the permeability is instead of being in the individual lot, it now goes to the entire lot.
Yeah, now that part of the change, I don't have any opposition to that. That is, my understanding is that's just legal housekeeping, where we're adopting the same standards that would already apply to other types of permitted construction. So we're just saying, now that we've added single-family attached as a valid type of build in the RFM, we're also going to employ the same standards for permeability. And
So what would potentially be the downside of another development doing a single-family attached in that small area that's raising the concern?
I don't know that I don't know. I can't answer that question. That's my concern.
It sounds like there's the land development code as it exists today is what you have a problem with.
Correct. Right.
Well, that's what we have right now today.
Right.
And we have to make the decision off of what we have today.
We have to make a recommendation of approve or deny on the alteration to the land development code. So we're not looking at the project, or we're asked to complete this task of modifying the LDC or recommending against it.
Right. What we have today says multifamily only, and it wants to be changed to attached single family. And so with that, now you're getting, it's not a problem, but you have to get into this HOA and all these things that go along with, and this is not providing for that the way I read it, so, maybe that's another way to correct it.
But it also doesn't provide for the HOA requirements for a multifamily.
Just to clarify that, Mr. Barry answered you before, and perhaps it wasn't clear, but the Land Development Code as it exists today, in the subdivision section of the Land Development Code, does require a POA to be provided to the city and recorded as part of the final plat process. That is a current requirement. The only change that is happening, being requested for your recommendation today, is changing the word multifamily only to include attached single family, because your city code defines attached single family differently than multifamily. So the POA requirement that exists today does exist and doesn't change. The setback requirements and everything, none of that is changing or being proposed to change. It's adding the fact that you could have a townhome development as opposed to a condominium form of ownership, and ensuring that the entire lot is considered as opposed to each individual lot, which is independent of the type of ownership, how your code treats every other development. It's just because attached single family is a defined term in your code, that other change is necessary. So that's the only, I just want to be clear that that's the only change. So many of your concerns are very valid and heard and addressed in the subdivision code that is not being proposed to change.
Right. But again, if it's a single family, if it's fee simple, then that changes what the owner expects to be able to do with the property.
As limited by the POA documents that your code requires to be
So
filed.
if I bought one of these properties and I wanted to paint my house orange with purple dots, I could do that, or I can't do that.
There is no design guidelines here, whether it's a condominium form of ownership, an attached single-family ownership, or an apartment. So there are no design guidelines. That said, this project did go to the Board of Adjustment for approval, and this project has very specific design parameters because of it.
Right.
But your concern is not specific to the ownership. Your concern is specific to any property, residential property that would exist, whether it's a condominium or a fee simple.
So, which is really outside of the scope of what we're being asked today.
Yeah, these are either shortcomings in our RFM definitions, where we would like design guidelines, but that's a different discussion, or these are things that could be looked at a CUP level, but that's not what we're asked to,
Right.
I don't really think design is much in the planning
not in the
scope
district.
anyway.
No.
So would it just make sense to make a motion in either direction? Okay. I'd like to make a motion for approval.
I second to approve.
Roll call, please.
Member Angelides?
Yes.
Member Grocott?
Yes.
Member Ray?
Yes.
Member Perry?
No.
Chair Hubbard?
No.
Motion carries 3-2.
So we are moving on to ordinance, let's see here. This is 5B, 2024-07. And are we looking at this as a combination of this plus 2024-08?
That's how it's being presented, yes.
0708.
Yeah, because this will move the pool units to that
Right.
property.
Okay, if we could pull up the PowerPoint. This is conditional use permit 24038. It's presented in your agenda as resolution 2024-08, which is a requirement for all conditional use permits associated with ordinance 2024-07, which is the density pool request, and I'll explain that in a moment. The applicant is Catherine E. Cole, Esquire of Hill Ward Henderson for Miramar Resort St. Pete LLC. The request is to partially redevelop an existing temporary lodging use, including construction of a new 8-story, 30-unit lodging tower with rooftop restaurant that will extend to 76 feet in height with non-habitable overrun not to exceed 86 feet in height. This will increase total site density to 64.2 units per buildable acre. Here's a brief timeline of how the application has moved forward. In April, the applicant held a community meeting at the subject property. August 2nd, the application was deemed complete. There was a technical review committee meeting held by staff on August 28th. And then, of course, tonight is the planning board hearing. I wanted to summarize the request. The conditional use permit 24038 encompasses the 50 lodging units. In the Land Development Code, any development project that exceeds 30 lodging units or 50 feet in height is required to come to the planning board for review prior to the city commission. The applicant is proposing 50 lodging units on just under 0.78 acres. They're requesting 38 units based on the base development standards. That's the boutique hotel condo district, which allows up to 50 units per acre. They're also requesting to draw 12 units from the boutique hotel condo density pool. That's the associated ordinance. The new tower will be 76 feet in height above base flood elevation. That's to the top of the habitable roof. Again, any project, new project that exceeds 50 feet in height does require this review. There are associated requests that aren't necessarily covered under the scope of the conditional use permit. These are elements that the applicant could undertake if they wish to move forward. Limited interior commercial, of course, the rooftop restaurant with the bar, that would be part of the conditional use permit, but they are permitted limited interior commercial. Landscaping, pool, and parking lot improvements, and the applicant is proposing to renovate 20 remaining lodging units in this project. So the top of the screen shows the existing conditions. This is from the survey. The bottom of the screen shows the proposed site plan. Looking at the existing development, the applicant is generally looking to retain the existing northern building that contains those 10 units. There is a lobby to the east that is being retained as well. To the south, the existing building, there are 10 units that are being retained, 2 levels, 5 on each level. There are 7 existing units, 10 that are entitled. That makes the 30 site-wide that are being demolished and being replaced with parking, landscaping, and then to the south end, a beach access point. In exchange for the 10 units that are being discontinued, the 7 that are being demolished, as well as the 3 that are being given up for the new development, the applicant is constructing a 30-unit tower with a rooftop restaurant that's set to the western side of the property and is a completely new development. So back in 2021, the applicant did come forward with a project and they were approved for a request for this property. This was resolution 2021-04, same number for the associated ordinance. I just wanted to put together a small table that went through the differences in the 2 development proposals. The density has come down slightly from that request. They were previously approved for 54 lodging units. They're requesting 50 under this proposal. The height has not dramatically changed. The height is still built to the maximum allowed for the zoning district, which is 76 feet above base flood elevation. What has significantly changed is the proportion of the building that is built at or near that height limit. The city calculates floor area for buildings in this district based on certain amenities as well as guest room square footage. And based on those calculations, the applicant is proposing a building, and that's inclusive of the existing buildings that are being renovated, of about half the size as the one that was approved back in 2021. The impervious surface ratio has slightly decreased. It has gone from 85% down to 83%. That's a reduction of 2%. 85% is the maximum allowed for the zoning district. One change is the number and the total size of the beach access. The applicant is retaining both of the existing buildings. There was originally a beach access under the 2021 approval that was proposed for the northern side of the site. That building is remaining there, and they are proposing landscaping on that side, but no beach access. The southern beach access, the property to the south of here along the northern end of the site, does have an existing 6-foot beach access. The applicant has, as they agreed to back in 2021, to expand that beach access to 10 feet, so that would be a 4-foot encroachment onto their property. There is ultimately a reduction of that one beach access along the northern side, which is 3.5 feet. I did also want to point out before I move on from this slide, typically development approvals expire 1 year after they're issued. There was an appeal of the request that went forward in 2021 that drew out the approval to November. It had originally gone forward to the City Commission back in April of 2021. The state of Florida has a fairly unique statute that whenever a county is under a state of emergency, if there is an existing development approval within that county, it is extended by the state of emergency, and once the state of emergency ends, it can be extended up to an additional 6 months plus the time that was told. We have actually been under a state of emergency for Hurricane Ian for going on 2 years now. That was within the 1-year approval limit for the 2021 approval. So the applicant might mention, I might mention later on in the presentation, that 2021 approval is still technically active, and the ordinance was written to address that, to ensure that the old project at some point in time, if this is approved, is eventually discontinued for the new project. I just wanted to bring that up in case it's mentioned later on. Staff request testimony from the applicant is followed. We did, through the staff report, look through the 20 criteria that apply to this project. We did find that the project was generally in compliance with the criteria. There were a few elements that the applicant we would like to just provide some additional testimony for. The first is the flood-proofing efforts to safeguard the renovated buildings into the future. A technical review committee, we did ask what was being done to the renovated buildings to make them flood-proof. They were developed in the 1950s. They long preceded any kind of required FEMA compliance for new structures in our city, which came around in the 1980s. The applicant did indicate that they were going to be installing flood panels to help protect those units, but a portion of the remaining buildings are seaward of the limit of moderate wave action line. This is not a velocity zone, but it is adjacent to the velocity zone, and it's where under a 100-year storm there could be waves of 1.5 to 3 feet based on the model estimate. So under a new development, it would be expected that those buildings were raised, that there be either deep foundations or piles set. The buildings are not currently compliant with that. I don't understand the applicant to be making those improvements under this scope. So that is something I just wanted them to speak to, how the buildings are going to be flood-proofed into the future with the investment being placed into them. The financial capacity to complete improvements in the proposed construction timeline. Speaking with the applicant, I do understand they wish to move forward relatively quickly on this development. I did speak to the applicant after TRC. They did indicate that they had secured funding for the development, but I just wanted them to speak to that on the record. And also any expected late night operation of the rooftop restaurant and its outdoor balcony patio. As communicated through the staff report, there have been some improvements to what could have potentially induced noise to the adjacent properties under the previous developments. There were the elimination of the side balconies. There were a few other improvements that I felt would have mitigated those nuisances, but just the late night outdoor balcony operation, I did want the applicant to speak to through their testimony tonight. Staff recommended some conditions if the board does wish to recommend approval of this. The first is that the accompanying ordinance must be passed to allow for the subject development. Again, that is the ordinance for the 12 additional units above the 38 that is allowed for the base zoning. They are available in the pool. Based on the discontinuation of the 21 approval, there would actually be units going back into the pool because it is a reduction of unit count under this request. But we did just want to make that clear. That is a recommended condition for the conditional use permit. The second is that approval of this project will divest units awarded to the project under the 2021 approval. I did speak to the applicant just before this meeting. They did ask that the language be changed to divest the units after the appeal has completed. I have no concerns with that. That's an understandable change. And they may bring that up in their testimony. The third is that the outdoor balcony space next to the restaurant not be permitted any kind of permanent seating or outdoor music after 10 p.m. until 7 a.m. That is the city's typical lower decibel level hours. It goes from 65 down to 55. And we do request that for this project. We requested the applicant prepare a dunes plan, easement, green building standard identification, and sidewalk easement before site plan approval. And condition number 5, that they be implemented before the hotel tower is opened. That any significant changes in color, facade material, massing, or similar may require the project to return to the City Commission for reconsideration. This would be after city manager review. The Land Development Code already protects these type of projects from any significant footprint expansion, any additional units, any additional height. That would automatically trigger a return to City Commission. So that's already covered under the code. These are additional elements based on the design of the building, which staff did find to be consistent with the area and with the design criteria. We did request that any significant changes be brought back to the City Commission for reconsideration. We did ask that all hotel deliveries shall take place on site by the CO for the hotel. The applicant has indicated that they would make that occur. Valet service shall be maintained for the life of development. The city's land development code does allow for valet service, but based on the layout of the parking spaces on the lot, that would need to be maintained for the life of the development. Landscaping shown is the minimum that shall be proposed to the site plan. In a lot of cases, we do have applicants swap out species, swap out different ground covers and so on. But the landscaping, they're showing the quantity, the height standards, that would be the minimum based on what's being presented to the planning board and the city commission. If they were to swap out species, they would need to keep the same number, the same height standards and so on. Reclaimed water shall be used for irrigation. Leak monitoring equipment shall also be used. The development, operational, aesthetic requirements of the code shall be met at the relevant stages of the permitting process as laid out in the resolution. Canopy trees shall be planted along the side beach pathway where viable. The applicant's currently proposing palms. We are asking for canopy trees just to provide a little bit additional shade in the parking lot as well as to the beach walk. Trash cans shall be installed along the southern beach access. Permeable pavement shall be used and maintained for pathways where viable. Green roofs, cool roofs, or similar techniques shall be used on the roof of the building where viable. And the 16th and 17th conditions, these are applied to any project moving forward. The approval may be rescinded if conditions are violated. The City Commission can review the project from time to time to ensure that criteria are being implemented and followed. I do want to pass this along to the applicant to make their presentation, but I did want to mention that I did present this as both applications together, but I did want to mention that separate action does need to be taken on the ordinance. Again, this is ordinance 2024-07, a motion to recommend approval with modification or denial for the 12 requested density pool units to 4200 Gulf Boulevard. The resolution is 2024-08, motion to recommend approval with conditions or denial for the requested 38 base units and 12 density pool units covered under ordinance 2024-07 in a hotel exceeding 50 feet in height to 4200 Gulf Boulevard. That's all I have. I am available for questions, and I believe the applicant has a presentation.
I have a question about the rooftop music, because I've been at other meetings and seen other meetings where people were given a very specific approach to the music, how loud actual decibels were quoted, a particular system that could only be managed by a few people or one person. And I'm just curious as to why we don't have a consistent, like this one just says not after 10 o'clock. And so it's different than what I've seen in other instances. And so does the city have a standard thing for rooftop bars?
So I think that one's covered in the conditions because there was a requirement that the music be on the indoors part of that upper level and not be piped outdoors through the use of amplification equipment speakers.
Right, but it's still not stated consistently with how other rooftop bars have been asked to do it. There's no mention of the decibels that I saw. So I'm just wondering about why we would not be the same from project to project.
And that could be a recommendation of the board. The reason why the condition was different was because based on what was presented in the floor plans, I did not expect there to be any kind of outdoor dining. That doesn't change the music, of course. The applicant could still play the music outdoors prior to 10 p.m. as recommended by staff. The other major difference is that the Land Development Code doesn't have specific decibel standards, but it does instruct staff to treat properties that are adjacent to residential differently in terms of the decibel standards. The way it's actually written in the code is that after a certain period of time, abutting properties shouldn't be able to hear any outdoor music at all. There shouldn't be any amplified music heard at all from those property lines. With this property being in the location that it is, not being next to those residential, that was the reason why those standards weren't set. But again, it's entirely up to the planning board to make that recommendation if you wish.
So it could be approved with a condition for the consistency.
If you had decibel standards you'd like to recommend, like you pointed out with some of the other projects, there had been specific decibel limitations at the property line and at the deck and so on, so, yes.
So the two adjacent properties are both transient lodging?
Yes.
Okay.
Brendan, I have a question on the land development code. So, and I'm going off the first packet, so my page numbers might be a little bit off. But on page 54, it said that the land development code does not require demolition or relocation of existing non-conforming structures unless they are substantially approved. And then the packet goes on to say that, I think it's on page 44, that the units are being substantially renovated. So where do we draw that line as a city?
So substantial improvement, and truthfully, I probably could have used a better word than substantially renovated. They're not passing the city's substantial improvement threshold based on the conversations I've had with the applicant. They could probably speak more to that, but substantial improvement under the city's code is an improvement that cumulatively exceeds 50% of the proven value of the depreciated value of the building over a 5-year period. In speaking with the applicant, they do not plan to pass that threshold, and that is the point at which some of the zoning standards related to setbacks, related to other elements do come into play. They are not passing that under this request for the remaining developments. For the new development, they will need to be fully in compliance because of course it's...
So we don't look at the land development code, we don't look at the entire project then, because clearly that tower is going to increase the value of this property more than 50% overall for this plot.
And it is specific to the actual improvements to the renovated buildings. Now, there are land development code triggers that occur based on the amount of development taking place on the site. Some of the landscaping requirements, for example, kick in. This property is not large enough to require a beach access, but had it been, it would have needed that. But based under the building code, based on some of the other substantial improvement codes, they don't need to make the current buildings compliant. No.
So that 50% is based on the existing value now?
Correct, based
not
on the
including
existing.
the new development?
Correct, it does leave out the new development. There are elements that are triggered, the stormwater requirements, for example. They will need to make the whole site compliant with the stormwater code, but anything related to the substantial improvement of the existing remaining structures would not be triggered based on what they've expressed they're going to do.
And then on our city process for determining impact fees to the city, so we give a developer credit for units they're demolishing in calculating what their impact fees are to the city? Am I to understand that right?
We do for lodging. It's just a set fee. In certain types of residential, for example, it's based on the unit size, but lodging is just across the board a set fee, so they would receive a credit for the existing remaining units.
On that same issue, why is the sewer connection unknown? I mean, is that stuff you do at the site plan, or?
Yeah, so it's based on meter size, and at the site plan, they would be assessed that fee based on meter size.
And under the public benefit and amenity analysis, I saw that for the beach easement, it says the staff to request the 15 feet. Has that happened and that change been made? It's in here as a request.
That is in the resolution. That is something we're proposing, a 15-foot easement along the mean-high water.
So when you're proposing it, and we approve this, does that mean that's included, or is that another condition? How does that work?
That is currently proposed in the resolution, so that would be, if you were to accept all of the staff's recommendations, that would be part of it.
Okay, all right. And then I see that they're encouraged to provide the economic impact analysis, and the taxable value increase is expected. And I see that it says you encouraged. I didn't know if that had come in, and I just had not seen it yet.
No, the one item that's been provided since your packet was produced was the transportation management plan that was left at the dais, but I have not received that, no.
So does that come in like before it goes to the commission, or when does that actually enter?
It's not a requirement. It might be something that the applicant can either estimate, or it might be something that they have funding documents that they would be willing to share, but it's not something that for a project of this scale we've required. So it's at their own discretion if they want to provide that.
I would think it would be helpful to the city. So maybe as we look at our future requirements, that's an area that needs to be looked at.
Understood.
Brandon, I have one more question for staff, and that is, we require that the developer holds the community meeting, which they did hold the community meeting. Does the staff see those comment cards? Because they're not obviously part of this packet, so what happens with the comments that are gathered at those community meetings? And how do we know resolution has been, or issues have been addressed?
We do take those in. I did list, we received only a few comments for this one, and I was at the meeting. I did, I did attend. There were limited comments on this request, but I felt they were more questions than they were actual comments or requests for additional improvements to the site plan in this case.
Typically, the staff adjudicates that with the developer before it gets to us, is what you
Correct.
said.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks, Brandon.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. Sorry, Ms. Cole. Before Ms. Cole gives her presentation, can I just take a moment to remind the board that this portion is of a quasi-judicial procedure in nature. It is a little less formal than that of a court proceeding, but there are procedural requirements that we must comply with in accordance with the Florida law, such as basic standards of notice and due process. And the board, of course, is to make their recommendation to the City Commission based on competent substantial evidence. I know that the clerk did swear in those who are going to be coming before you to speak. However, I have a limited view, so I don't know if anybody else has stepped in that has not been sworn in yet. Of course, Ms. Cole exempt from that as an attorney. But also, if just real quickly on this matter, if there's any ex parte communications that any of the board members have had regarding this application, any written communications, research, site visits, anything like that, would you please make those disclosures?
I went to the community meeting that was held on this, on their site. That's all.
Okay.
I walked by the site just to scope it out.
I also went to the community meeting.
I was in attendance at the community meeting. Of course, it was prior to being a member of this board. I had a conversation by phone with the Vistas Property Management, Ms. Perrin Albertson. I had several questions for the staff and reached out to Mr. Berry on those. And I had one brief conversation with my D4 commissioner, Mr. Mulholland, on a subject that pertains to development writ large. And then I did just stop by the property one more time just for to remind myself what the layout was.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. Katie Cole, Hill Ward Henderson, representing the applicant who's here today, Kevin Bowden. So thank you. Mr. Bowden was sworn in. We'll go through a brief PowerPoint and answer any questions that you may have. We also have Jack Bodziak, the architect of record, and Sean Cashin, the engineer of record, who can also testify as to the consistency with the land development code and the comprehensive plan with respect to this. I did have a question for the city attorney. With the density bonus ordinance, the board sits as the LPA, but with respect to the conditional use permit, I believe they sit as the planning board. Can that just make, despite the fact that we're doing one presentation, can they just make that distinction at the time of vote, who they are sitting as?
Yes, at the time of the vote, they can do the vote for the ordinance 2024-07 as the LPA, and then reconvene as a planning board and make the vote on the conditional use permit recommendation.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I just wanted to clarify for the record that despite the fact that you're sitting as two boards today, we are going to move forward with one presentation.
Thank you.
We appreciate that. So thank you. As Mr. Berry testified, this is both a density bonus ordinance and a conditional use application. This is a project at 4200 Gulf Boulevard that was approved in 2021. I failed to put this in the PowerPoint because I really wanted to focus on the current application, but I was hoping to get the overhead switched over so I could just show you the comparison. This is the approved project that was the subject of an appeal in 2021 and was litigated. And eventually the project was settled, and the settlement allows for the construction generally of the project. Building permits have been submitted to the city and are under review. All the fees for those reviews have been paid. But during that process, the owner, Mr. Bowden, and his family looked at the operations of the hotel, looked at the surrounding community, and really felt that the revised design that you're seeing today better served the community at large. That said, one of the conditions, as Mr. Berry said, speaks about the rescission of the density units that are applicable to this project, and that is an amendment to the conditions we would like to clarify to ensure that the fact that there are submitted building permits, that those units are not divested until any appeal period has passed. So I just did want to show this to you for reference. This is the existing Miramar Hotel, an aerial and along the street. So you can see the two buildings that will remain. And this is how it's proposed. So the front of the building, and Mr. Bodziak will walk through this. In fact, I'll just pause there with the pictures because everything else is pretty pictures for him to talk about, and I'll get into some of the details. In April, there was a neighborhood meeting, and at that meeting, it was interesting because there were several things that were going on in the city right around the same time. And that meeting, I have to say, I attend a lot of community meetings. 3 of you were there. I hope you have the same impression that it was quite a positive meeting. The news coverage was very positive. It was something that I'd never experienced before, and it's quite pleasant to see the results of that. The amended approval creates a more quaint development that Jack and his team really look to fit into the 1950s type of development theme of St. Pete Beach. As I said, the building permits are in process for the 2021 approval, but this request reduced the amount of density units from 15 to 12, as stated in the staff report. I would like to introduce Kevin Bowden, who's the owner of the property and operator now, and he can speak a little bit about the financial capacity and the operations of the hotel as it exists and his vision for the property as well.
Hello, everybody. My name's Kevin Bowden. Came in back in 2020, 21, and got the original approval. Obviously, live right over here in St. Petersburg, and follow a lot of the planning board meetings, followed all of the development of all the hotels coming. And we decided just to try to take it down a bit, like to keep with the 50 rooms, go with more of a motel feel. Financing was approved back at that time when we applied for the building permit. Then it got sued. It took about a year to solve that. And now we've gone back to the same bank, and we have approval to build this hotel as well. Decided, we own the Cambria Hotel up in Madeira Beach, which has a rooftop bar. Decided to bring this rooftop more of an inside event. It will have sliders. The outside deck is small. Most of the seating is inside. We'll close those doors after 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. to keep the sound inside. We will have dining at breakfast, we'll have dining at lunch, and we'll have dining at dinner outside and in. But we've also run into the problem with the weather comes at 6:30 at night and it rains, and it kind of, we have kind of a large restaurant rooftop bar that kind of get closed. So it kind of works out better for us as well. I think putting it inside will help keep the noise down, will help protect the neighbors from it, and we'll let our experts go and talk about the rest, I guess. I just want to talk about those things. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to introduce Jack Bodziak, who's the architect of record, and he can review his credentials for you. I'm sure you've seen him before, and he'll go through the project.
Good afternoon. I I've worked in this beach for quite a number of years. As a matter of fact, I'm sure a few of you I've run across in the past, and I've always enjoyed the relationship with the city. The project that we've presented today, the owner of record on this, Mr. Bowden, who you already heard from, he, as you know, the property was approved for this 47,000 square foot building with a large deck, and there was quite a bit of appeal to Mr. Bowden about the size of the building. They missed the charm of the old building there were buildings that were disappearing. And at one point, he came back to us and said, you know, what can we do to redesign this, retain some of the old charm, and accomplish something that financially worked? That's how we initially got into the redesign of the project. The old project still stands approved and partially permitted, actually. Even the foundation permit was issued. But Mr. Bowden decided that he'd like to take a shot at trying to do something that was more community friendly and that it kind of gave people a little touch of what they wanted while economically allowing the project to be successful. That's how we came up with this plan. The plan that we have basically is that we would demolish about 7 of the existing 27 units, and we would be able to then fit the tower on the front of the project far back from the road and remodel and update the existing units under the separate building permit allowance, which is in the code. So we got a reappraisal of the existing building that would allow us to undertake the work that Mr. Bowden would like to do. The idea was that we would have the 20 existing units that would have the old cachet about them, the old look of, as you can see from this photograph, this rendering, would retain a certain amount of the charm, be jazzed up a little bit to have a bit of a look of the deco, sort of style. We try to retain some of that as we get up to the building, the main building, which has 30 units in it, plus, I'm sorry, my voice is a little bit, which has the rooftop small restaurant facility. We have, as I say, we did this under the separate structure appraisal portion, and we retained 20 of the existing units. We have 48 parking spaces plus 4 motorcycle. We meet or exceed most or all segments actually of the required code requirements with this resubmittal that we've put in. The building is actually 70 foot 4 inches above grade to the top level, floor level, which is the way it's measured for height by the fire department. The building has an overall height with the elevator towers and everything that's closer to the 85 foot. The ISR allowable is 0.85. We're at 0.83. The landscaping required is 15%. We're at about 17%. So I think in the general overall picture, we tried to meet and come up with an accommodating response to all the requirements. To take, I don't know, do I use this to take you through or what? Okay. Essentially, you can see this is the front entry, which is where the existing office is. Across from that, is where we're removing the existing 7 units. Now, I'm going to try this, but I'm not sure. Let's see which way we go here. Oh. Oh, okay. There we go. All right, let me try to. Yep, got it. This is a beachfront view of the unit. We attempted to try and keep it in a contemporary deco still style. The main appeal, of course, is on the roadside view. Very difficult to make balconies look one way or the other. We did retain a relatively nice little setback of the rooftop where we created the balcony, the patio, balcony area rather, that actually creates a little bit of a setback to the restaurant on the roof. The idea was that would be a place that seating and people could come out and have an actual, a lot of people like to go out in the fresh air and enjoy the outside view. This is another shot from the road. You can see where the building on the left is much shorter than the one on the right. They both were the same length out to where the canopy presently is. We retained the two-story segment that you see up in there, and we demolished the 7 units on that side and a couple units that were up in the front where the new building is proposed in a two-story structure. We did demolish a couple units there also. The parking is all valet parking, and it makes it a lot more manageable on the site. A site this small, in order to retain these many units without going to a big elevated building, as was previously approved and presently stands in the approval process. Well, okay. This will show you the 70-foot 4 inches is from the grade to the highest floor level, which is the restaurant level. The boutique district, the 50-unit density is the allowable. The bonus allocation that exists already is from the pool. We will want to retain some of the bonus units to get to the 50 units an acre. The reduction from 4, we actually reduced the building by 4 units, even though the prior approval did have 4 additional units. We just didn't want to, it just became a jam if we went very much further with trying to squeeze units on. Site plan wise, you can see the lower section here where the parking is double parked, valet parked. That's where we tore down the 7, we're proposing to take down the 7 units. Plus, there are 2 units up in the front where you see the 8-story building. That area also has a couple units being demolished. So there are the 2 areas of demolition. You can see the 4, basically 5 units that would be parallel to the ones across from them in the front. The present driveway, there are presently 2 driveways going into the site. It's essentially just nothing but driveway out by the road. We would naturally consolidate it up to the current code, and that brings in the 1 single driveway, which is much more compatible with the road frontage and with the current regulations. It is within the current regulations. There are presently 2 pools up in the front, if you know the property at all, and we are consolidating those 2 pools into 1 pool that comes partially under the building. The beach access is on the southern end of the property. You can see that existing access that is 6 foot wide. Mr. Bowden is dedicating the other 4 foot to enable it to be a much more manageable beach access. So I think overall, the owner has tried to really make this into more or less an accommodation of trying to do something that's a little more in keeping with what some of the sentiments that we were experiencing through the approval process, and present something that really still had a lot of charm to it. The comprehensive plan, do you want to cover these?
Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
Thank you. Mr. Berry's staff report went through each of these comprehensive plan considerations, so I won't belabor it by repeating what he's already testified to and was included in the report that you all reviewed. And really, I think we're just would like your recommendation of approval for the density allocation and your approval of the conditional use approval for the increased density as well as the increased height today. I did want to specifically say that there were 3 conditions Mr. Berry spoke about, and I apologize, we didn't have these conversations until over the weekend and today, so they're not specific on my slide, but I want to walk through the 3 conditions that we would ask you to modify. The first condition is the timing of the grant of the units, which is condition number 2 in your staff report. And our ask would be that you include the language of non-appealable approval. So they would divest at non-appealable approval as opposed to the commission's approval, which is how it's stated now. Condition number 3, which discusses an additional use request. That was unfortunately some miscommunication between the staff and the applicant. We had a lot of discussions about the operation of the rooftop restaurant and bar, and because seats weren't shown outside, there's been a code change that requires a specific authorization for the outdoor use on the rooftop, and that hasn't been included in your request, but we would ask that you all consider it today, and it would be included and updated in the agenda for the commission meeting. And then, to the extent it is necessary to do so, the noise limitations that were discussed on page by Ms. Perry and Mr. Berry, it's what we expect, and so I think they're discussed further on page 115 of the packet. And condition 4D, with respect to the dune walkover, Ms. McMahon and your engineering staff visited the site. There's an extremely large dune that is adjacent to the public access entry. We would ask for the same consideration that other projects have, as the city's doing its own dune renourishment and maintenance projects, that it include this dune in that. The cost of the applicant to construct a walkover and permit a walkover on that dune would could be significant if DEP even allows it. And so we would ask for some flexibility there to work with the staff with respect to the dune walkover, and instead of it just being as practical by DEP, just have that a bit more open-ended with respect to both the city, potential city funding, as well as the city's cooperation and consideration of the dune walkover. We don't anticipate that a cut-through is ever going to be permitted by DEP. It's just a matter if a walkover is reasonable at this location.
Yeah, it's the CCCL falls right at the end of the property line where the current wall is, where their pool is. And if you've been to their property, a lot of you said you'd walk in, you see sand even comes over the wall onto the pool deck. And our goal is to make that a beach access for the public. And if you currently use that beach access to the south of their property, it's, you might need a hatchet to get through and actually access it. So, and then when you get up onto the actual beach, you are at a raised level. It's quite a large hill. So our goal is to work with DEP. Because it's westward of the CCCL, we have to. We're not going to be the ones determining what can be there. Our goal for the city, and I think for Kevin, is to make it, sorry, there you are, to make it accessible, and the best way that we can do that. So we looked at different options, and it might be a conversation, because we're doing something similar to this in some of our walkovers in Pass-a-Grille, to work with the Army Corps as well. So just know that that's our goal, is to make it accessible, and we had a good meeting out there. But there is a lot of vegetation that currently, if you walked that path, it's very difficult to get on. And then when you're on there, 12 feet up.
You just walk through the property now, right?
Right, and we don't want people to walk through the dunes, and that's where the path is right now. So we came up with a couple things, but at the end of the
So-
day, it's DEP that's going to direct us in this.
So DEP is the first step, and if they say a walkover is acceptable to them, then you're saying it's the city's interest to have that constructed, but it would be,
We want to definitely make it accessible, because that's our goal here, and that's why we're asking for the 15-foot to make this accessible for the residents, to be able to get to that 15-foot easement onto the beach, right? So there's a lot. I'll just encourage you to walk to the south side of the property and try to get onto the beach. Kevin will gladly meet you.
And the offsets of the current property, the building that's not moving on the north side prohibits an access on the north side?
There's no access,
Right, but you couldn't construct one on the north side in lieu of the one on the south side, the way that the lot is
no. No, there's
designed?
an equally large, I'll come up again, there's an equally large
Large
dune there
dune.
as well. I mean,
Okay.
the dune is just, they've grown since, we bought the property about 8 or 9 years ago, and they've just grown. I mean, they are, one on the north, one on the south. We have a little way out of the property in the middle where there's like a
Right.
volleyball court out there. The other thing I should mention is we closed the hotel the week after Labor Day. We're committed to build now this, we can either build the original plan that was approved or this one. but we're committed to go into construction before the end of the year, because the hotel has just gotten older and older over 8 years, and we do want to give the people the accommodations they expect when they come to the beach. So we have signs and everything, but I just want to let you know that happened.
And I told you the wrong condition. It's not 4D, it's 5C. Sorry about that. So the conditions sought to change are number 2, number 3, and 5C.
Brandon, can you pull up your PowerPoint so we could see the conditions? Do you have those listed?
They were abbreviated. Do you-
Okay.
So I just want to understand what your ask is for new language. Are you wanting to have the city perform that construction at the city's expense, or are you wanting to share it, or I just want to make sure I'm understanding?
I think the condition may be more reasonably worded to say, to work with the city on the construction. In other projects, the city is, if funding is available, going to construct it, and we would like that same consideration. So yes, as to city funding, but we first need to get to the cooperation and consideration if it's even an option.
Yeah, I can understand. I mean,
Yeah.
if DEP says you need to build a 20-foot high concrete bridge, that's not something you want to do.
Correct.
But, so I'm just wanting to understand how that language would look. Is there like a cap on expense, or how does that get worded? Or would the city find it acceptable to just word it as applicant and city will
Work together.
work together?
It's a pretty broad term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably, Sharon, I don't know if your thoughts on this, but I would rather not be so broad.
You can include something to
It
match.
costs us $250 or $250,000.
Right.
You can include something to match what's been done in similar spots, like Pasta Grill, maybe, for example. So there's kind of a standard.
Well, those are city
Access.
walkovers, not private property. Sharon, do you have any suggestions on how you would want that worded?
I apologize. Was it about one of the conditions? The sound was cutting out when one of the board members was speaking.
Our question is, the applicant obviously wants to protect themselves from being forced to build a prohibitively expensive dune bridge, but at the same time, there's an interest by the city to work with the applicant to make that happen should DEP say it's approved. So how do both sides protect themselves from an undue burden?
The way to your point, the way the condition's drafted now, the only out is if it's unnecessary to preserve the dune, and clearly a walkover is going to be necessary to preserve the dune. To your point, Mr. Chair, it is such a large dune that the potential expense would be significant. So I don't know. We haven't gotten it. Has the city received bids for any of the other walk?
We're still working with the Army Corps
Okay.
on a design. We looked at another option so it doesn't go over the dune, but as soon as you get to the sandy beach, kind of exiting the dune system to the north instead of going up and over and down. So it's a very unique property, that dune, and it's a healthy dune, and we don't, right now, when you walk through it to get to the beach, you're walking over actual sea oats.
Yeah. Would it be possible, I'm going to get in trouble by saying this out loud before saying it to my client, but instead of construction of a dune walkover, it would be
Accessible beach.
accessible beach access?
You're right, I think.
Because it's very potentially going to be around it.
We're going to probably have to change the easement itself to get them to the beach, not to go over the dune, which is on our land. So I think we'd like to work to get that access, but I don't know if we can go over that dune anyways.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the applicant is willing to provide access from the beach access point. It just most likely is not going to be over the dune or through it.
Yeah, that seems
If we.
language that says accessible?
Construction of an access point. Construction of a beach access.
And then I would suggest,
Is that reason? Yeah.
yeah, some at, when it goes, when or if it goes to commission, if we put the two options out there and show how it connects to the 50-foot easement.
Perfect.
Like, I think a visual would be very beneficial for that, because it's, I think all the sand on the beach has arrived at this location.
Yeah,
Agreed. I mean, and I think you hear from the applicant, they are committed to providing beach access. It's just.
I think we need the access to get to the beach, and then we need to have access to that 15-foot easement.
Right.
If we can connect the dots, I think that would be helpful.
So, but I agree that the if practical language is broad in today's days. So if we can say construction of a beach access across the southern property line.
That connects to the 50-foot.
That connects to the 50-foot easement, is that?
Yeah, I think.
Okay, and going back to condition 3, that request was to add the ability to have outdoor seating,
Correct,
but you're not asking for outdoor amplified music?
correct. The change in the condition would be to delete without issuance of a subsequent conditional use permit, because we would ensure that the commission sees that request as part of this conditional use permit. And then the change to condition number 2, again, would be instead of immediately upon passage of both, immediately upon the unappealable, I'll look at Sharon, approval or effectiveness of the ordinance. It depends how you.
I'm sorry, if I may, Ms. Cole and Mr. Chair, just to correct a procedural issue, you guys are sitting as the planning board for both of these items, both the ordinance and the conditional use permit, and doing some research while the applicant was presenting. I just wanted to inform you of that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As opposed to the LPA, I think she was going. I think it would say immediately upon the unappealable approval of both ordinance and resolution.
Okay.
Those would be the 3 changes.
Could I request
And yeah.
super brief intermission? I have to go to the restroom. We have been sitting for a little while.
I don't know how to handle that.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what the procedures are for that.
Madam Clerk, how do I
You
execute?
can just call a recess and say how many minutes till we return.
5, 10? All right, let's call a 5-minute recess.
So yes, so thank you, and sorry to belabor and kind of clumsily do that, but we appreciate your consideration of those 3 changes. And with that, with the testimony on the record and the evidence before you, we would appreciate your recommendation of approval of both of these items. We also have the project engineer here if you had questions about parking and valet and the access points and the transportation management plan, as well as the traffic study that were part of the application incorporated, as well as our 2 architects. You already heard from Mr. Bodziak, but if you had any other questions for him. So with that, appreciate your consideration and ask for your support. Thank you.
Sure, yeah. I do have some questions. From the transportation management plan that was submitted today, we've got the language that the proposed on-site parking facilities will be serviced by valet staff at all times. Is it the intent to have valet be mandatory? It's not a combination self-parking plus valet if you want it?
Introduce yourself.
Sean Cashin. The site is going to be valet 24/7 at all times.
Okay. Would you, so we've also got that as a condition number 8, valet service shall be maintained for the life of the development. Would you be amenable to inserting the word exclusively, so it clearly states that the intent is to make valet the only option?
That's fine.
Okay. The August 28th TRC meeting, there was a discussion of the fire department needing a turnaround due to the 150-foot distance from street to the new building. Has that been resolved?
Yes, Sean Cashin again. I've corresponded with Kelly Insis, and we prepared a fire truck turning exhibit to her showing where the truck would access the property, where it would park, and we did meet the NFPA 1 criteria for less than 150-foot back-out maneuver for the fire truck or any emergency vehicle.
Okay, is that the, so there's a small graphic on what was the prior page 117, I think now 124. Is that the diagram?
Yes.
A couple pages later, 1 page later.
I have not.
This looks like this.
Uh,
Look at what he's.
But if this works too,
Will you hold that up again, Mr. Chair?
yeah.
Oh, that was the original.
Okay.
Yeah, that one, it's
That
so
was,
small, yeah.
Yeah, that was the original submittal that the comment was made about.
Oh,
And this is the updated.
okay.
How's that?
Any questions about that
So-
exhibit that's shown on the?
Are these turnarounds dependent on cars being moved out of the way to allow the turnaround to occur?
Actually, there's no turnaround. This shows the fire truck, and there's a lot of blue and red lines, but those are the wheel path as well as the outer points of the, in this case, the fire truck. So that shows the ingress movement of the fire truck into the site. And it shows 146 feet from the edge of pavement on Gulf Boulevard to the back end of the fire truck. And the fire truck would back out the same way that it enters the property. And some of the other designations for Kelly, the blue, I apologize, I had a bunch of my CAD guys sick with COVID, so I drew this up. But some of those blue lines and designations, that was showing her that we would have less than 250 or less than 300-foot hose lengths, so the fire truck could be able to access all points of the property for fire suppression less than 300 feet.
Okay.
And I misspoke, so to clarify, the page that you were looking at in the small, this is simply a picture of these blue and red lines.
Oh, got it, okay, all right.
And I keep looking over my shoulder at the fire, at Kelly and the engineers to be sure I'm not speaking out of turn.
There was mention of a valet queuing plan. I assume that's not prepared at this point because there's not a valet service hired. do you have a rough idea on how that would look? The only reason I ask is I am a regular patron of the applicant's Madeira property at the Tiki Bar, and I see vehicles queued up out into the street. I know this property is obviously a lot deeper than that parking garage, so I just want to understand, knowing from the TRC meetings, there's an intent to host weddings and big events. There could be a sudden influx of cars. I just want to understand what the plan is on how to get them off of Gulf Boulevard.
Sean Cashin again. As far as the valet, I mean, a valet company will be employed, and the way these guys work, they'll be working in tandem, and they'll have a chart or a map showing the location of certain cars where they're parked. And oftentimes, you're going to have two valet guys. One guy's going to have to move the car out of the way so the back car, in this instance, can be accessed and provided to one of the patrons. And in the same way to park them as well.
Okay.
I've seen it work. It's a choreography, and they do it quite well.
Okay. Do you know the intent, this might be a city question, what would the hurricane evacuation plan look like? Would it be evacuate at time of named storm hurricane warning? Do we have requirements and they're agreeing to abide by those, or are we trying to adopt something more stringent? I saw it mentioned, but there's not a plan yet.
That's in our comprehensive plan, and other municipalities follow it as well. The expectation would be at the time of watch, so that would be, get the guests out of the city so we could focus on the residents.
Okay, so when that plan is submitted, we would just validate that it matches. Okay.
Correct.
So there's a, condition 7 is no deliveries from the center lane of Gulf Boulevard, but there's also a, let's see, it was page 44 that stated there's no dedicated loading space. I just wanted to understand how that will be accomplished.
The applicant can confirm this, but in speaking with them, they aren't going to have larger trucks. They are going to be the smaller delivery vehicles. Really, it's for, I assume, laundry and just the limited rooftop restaurant. They did say that they were able to accommodate this on site, so.
Okay. Does anyone else have questions?
Yes, I have several. So on page 47 of the original staff report, which talks about the transportation, and it talks about peak trips, et cetera, was that calculation based solely on the patrons of the hotel, or does that also accommodate individuals coming into the property to use the new rooftop restaurant amenity?
That is based on the guest rooms, typically with developments like this, and it would be possible to calculate those in. I did run the numbers. I don't remember them offhand. I could get them for you shortly, though. Even based on that, if we were to consider the rooftop restaurant as a typical restaurant that's held out to the public, it would be under the threshold that we usually recommend a transportation study for. But typically with resort developments, they do include the accessory restaurants in that calculation.
Okay, thank you. And then going back to the event parking, I think this is for the developer. The event parking, and understand that there's going to be a valet in place. Have you contracted with another location to move those cars to? Because you won't have sufficient parking, I would assume, on your property. If the guests are filling, then you have an event, a reception. The documents are like, say, weddings and receptions and things like that. So where is the plan that those cars will go to?
There has not been a contract yet, but in the event there's one necessary, that is what the owner would have to seek to do.
Okay. And then the only other question is, would the developer be amenable to contributing to a city's supplemental transportation system in the amount equivalent to those peak hours, peak trips identified in the transportation portion of the staff report, so that we're offsetting the cost to the city for what we're currently contracted as freebie, but it could be another supplemental beach ride, which is something consistent which we've asked for from other developers.
I'm unsure, are you asking for the developer to basically not take the credit for the 10 units they're demolishing?
No, I'm talking about for the additional traffic that they're generating through the traffic report, which was those peak trips that I was referring to on the page 47.
Well, they will be paying a transportation impact fee.
So so it's based on those peak hours, or is it based on those peak trips, or is it based on the peak trips plus what you're expecting restaurant
Talk
traffic
about
to
how
be?
mobility fees are kept.
So currently, the only fee would be for the transportation impact, and that would be based on the room count, and that is usually inclusive of all the development. So we wouldn't separately charge for the rooftop restaurant. But any additional fee, if you're referring to past developments, that was a specific condition of either the conditional use permit or the development agreement. In those cases, we would not collect those without a condition in place.
Okay, so we have applied those conditions in other redevelopments
Correct.
recently.
Yes, correct. And that was specifically for a multimodal fee, proportional to the relative impact that we would expect for the development, so.
Okay, so that's what I'm asking, is if the developer would be amenable to paying that multimodal fee proportionate to.
I don't know that I can answer that question on behalf of the developer because we have no idea what that calculation is, what the number it would be based upon, how it would be calculated, how it's been, the other projects in which that has been done has been such an increase. I mean, I think you're saying, you're talking about the 7.6 trips. You want a fee assessed to the 7 trips?
It looks like 19 peak hour trips, considering all.
That's a total site-wide, so the increase is 7 trips. So total.
Right, but.
So there already is trips there now.
Understand.
So there's 7
Which
trips.
The city is paying for through the multimodal system currently. We bear the cost of those theoretically.
Or that's a long policy conversation, but I don't know that we cannot agree to something that I have no idea what you're asking for.
So
I mean, I understand, I hear your words, I just don't know what that number is, I don't know how it would be assessed, I don't know how it's calculated for these types of projects. It's nothing that we've discussed or the city has asked for in the past.
So just the 2 other projects you're referencing automatically, because it's over 3 acres, there already had to be a shuttle service provided. That is in our code. This project doesn't even require them to do a traffic study
Right.
at the size. So they're providing that to us, but that wasn't a requirement for that.
Understand.
So I don't know what that would look like or what the cost would be.
How difficult would it be to determine what a cost would be?
For 7 trips?
Is it 7 trips a day? Is that what the 7 represents?
Yes, 7.6.
Over the
trips
cost
at
of a
peak
year,
hour.
over the cost of 5 years?
I mean, that
How difficult is it to figure out? I mean, it might just be not worth it, but it might, I don't think not looking into it is necessary.
I don't know that that's how the mobility fee ordinance is drafted to even be able to calculate that, but I'll defer to.
And that is 7 trips at peak hour, so it wouldn't be per day for the 20 units. That's at the 4 to 6 p.m. peak hour. We would expect 7 additional trips per hour during that range. The mobility fee we collected on behalf of the county, so they set the rates for that, and that's that $3,208 per unit. That's a number that they've adopted. My understanding was the reference was to the other projects, and there had been a separate local multimodal fee that had been partially worked out, that was partially calculated based on trip generation and trip ends for the freebie service. It wasn't exclusively for freebie, but it had been based on that. That's something we could come up with. proportion would be much, much smaller, but we do have that data. We could look it up, so.
That's all I'm asking, is if we could look it up and take a look at it. This is something that continues to come up in budget meetings for the city, things that continues to come up to taxpayers, is the cost of this and who's bearing the cost of it. So I'm just asking, can we have staff look into it and at least provide the commission that information when it goes to commission so that they understand what it is, what that would be? And then on the new transportation management plan, it references the full-service restaurant, pool, beach facilities, cabanas, bars, etc. And I just want to call out that the staff specifically said that there is no permitting currently in place for the property owner to have cabanas, beach bar, beach service, etc. So is that'll be addressed?
Correct. As you're aware, the city's reviewing its customary use ordinances, and we would anticipate once that happens,
There's also.
they will either seek to or not seek to permit those uses.
Okay, great, thank
There's
you.
also the beach stewardship, which is working on a new beach ordinance, which addresses cabanas and things. And I'm assuming, I don't know if that has to be stated as a condition, but it is something that everybody will have to comply with. And so maybe that needs to be a condition, because I know in some.
You can't have beach service on the beach without a permit for alcohol service. So if that's what he's doing, he'd have to apply for a permit.
Okay, so that,
However, that's outlined
Okay.
currently in our code. If you're doing alcohol service, there's a process in place.
okay. And then,
Put cabanas out, you don't need a permit from us.
But I don't know what might change around cabanas, because I don't know what all the new ordinance will be approved. So.
Neither do I.
and then I think you touched on this when you asked us to change the verbiage on the rooftop bar. I know currently it said that music would not be piped out. I recognize on the drawings that is a retractable wall between the bar and the rooftop deck area. So either that door will close at 10 o'clock or music will cease inside at 10 o'clock?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. And then on page 51 of the staff report, they talk about litter on the beach. And, I think that's where it was talked, because they're not permitted for any sales. The only thing that, and it might be in the way that the city manages going to site plan or certificate of occupation, is a couple things, and that includes like posting no alcohol signs beyond this point at that access out to the beach. Is that already required by?
Yes.
Okay, great, excellent, perfect. The reclaimed water, there were several references throughout this staff's report that said if connected to reclaimed water if available. What would prohibit this property from being connected to reclaimed water?
Sean Casham. I believe there is reclaimed water available to the site, and we're all for using reclaimed water for the landscaping.
Great, thank you. I did want to talk about the sea turtle, the land development code for 44.4. I know in page 52 it said lighting would be compliant, and I assume this means all buildings, old and new, the glass tinted windows, old and new, as required by the land development code for the sea turtles. Additionally, I'd like to know if the property owner would be amenable to educational postings on the property. Again, we've asked other developers to do this, just to say, hey, this is what on the beach, if you dig a hole, cover the hole. Please, trash is important to us. If you're up on a balcony, please keep your blinds closed after 10, things like that. Just general information to the public to help them understand what's important to the.
It wouldn't be to the public, it would be to the guests.
To the guests, yes, to the guests. To clarify, yes. Okay, great, thank you. And I think that's all I had to say.
So that was, you were asking for that as an additional condition?
Um,
The-
that- If it needs to be a condition, I think.
We heard you.
I don't know that it needs to be a condition. I think the property owner, if they're willing to comply with that, then
Is the intent to allow the non-guests to use the restaurant?
To use the, what, restaurant?
Correct, the restaurant. Just for guests or allow the public?
No, it would be open to the public, right? Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Do I have a motion?
Public
Public
We
comment.
have public
Oh,
comment.
public comment, I'm sorry.
I did not receive any cards.
Okay.
All right.
All right, now do I have a motion?
I motion to approve given the conditions and I guess the new ones, I don't know if there are any new conditions or if it's
Yeah.
just agreed
So-
upon.
I can-
Are the changes you're asking for in the ordinance or the resolution? Just want to make sure that when you make the motion that we,
Yeah.
The resolution
the resolution, so
for the conditions.
So
do it as two separate, vote on the ordinance first.
as the LPL or?
Yep, and we're doing it for both, and then do a separate motion for the resolution with the conditions discussed, the
Okay.
three condition,
I-
right?
I think the attorney advised that despite the agenda stating that the ordinance was as the LPA, the code states you're seated as the planning board for both. If I heard you
That's
correctly,
correct.
Sharon. Yeah.
Yeah.
So no need to split.
Okay.
But you'll need a motion for the ordinance and then a separate motion for the resolution, not together.
Okay.
That is correct.
Yeah.
All right, and your
And
motion was for the
it's-
ordinance?
Sure, yeah.
It's the resolution that requires the conditions, right?
Yeah.
Correct. And
We've made adjustments to,
the resolution
Resolution.
conditions that are on record. is
but I'm
allowed
not
to make
sure,
that motion.
I'm not personally 100% clear on what the actual changes were to the resolutions.
I can summarize.
I'll summarize and you guys correct me. So in the first one, it was regarding the timing. It was once there was an unappealable approval of the ordinance
Ordinance and resolution.
and resolution. Okay. Outdoor seating including without an additional conditional use permit.
Permanent seating unless approved by the city commission is what Mr. Barry and I thought was reasonable.
There was,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Instead of without issuance of the subsequent conditional use permit, to change that to say unless approved by the city commission.
Okay. There was a talk about the noise limitations, but other than defining closing the doors, we didn't define a decibel rating for the noise limitations. And we had discussed standardizing it, but we don't have wording for that now. How do we adjust for that without having it, without having the information currently? Can we approve that portion of it or vote on that portion of it without knowing it?
Knowing which portion?
So in the noise limitations, there was a section regarding noise limitation, and it was agreed that they would close the doors at 10 o'clock, or amplified music wouldn't be heard beyond that. Member Perry requested that there be a standardization of a decibel rating that was similar to others that had been approved.
So I would say, currently in our code, and this is why 10 o'clock is, why we're talking about 10 o'clock, it's 65 decibels before 10 o'clock, and at 10 o'clock it goes down to 55. So any property on the beach have to comply with that in itself. Now, if you want, so that's already in our code
Okay.
for any property existing, so we already have that decimal level. Now, if you wanted to add something similar to what we did to other projects, it is a, what's it called? What's it called? There's a fancy word. And it might be a knob.
It's a sound governor. We've set a standard where for at the residential property line, the affected property line for other hotel projects, after 10 p.m., it was set to equal to ambient. So it would be, you should not be able to discern the music from the abutting property after 10. That's how it was set for the others.
I think the distinction was that the others are adjacent to residential properties and this is not, so.
Well, the bottom line is if there's a city ordinance that says at 10 o'clock,
Goes down to 55.
down to 55, you gotta meet the city ordinance. so
Right.
yeah. And then the final one, which was the accessibility to the beach, did we agree to the wording on that?
I think they were going to work out the specific language, but the applicant was to permit construction of beach access point to the 50-foot easement in a way that's agreeable between them and the city.
And that's provided to the commission in a visual to show that.
Okay.
I think what we would ask for the flexibility that between now and the commission meeting, we could have the surveyor out there to actually survey that dune and see what the height and the width is and work with staff between now and next month to see what is practical. I know they've already come up with some proposed solutions, so maybe we could have some more specific options. But I think the commitment is to provide beach access.
Okay. And then there was the addition to 8, that valet service be the exclusive parking option.
Correct.
On the beach easement, are we adhering to what the staff's request was? Because I think there was a difference between originally what the property developer was offering and then what the staff came in as the recommendation. Is that correct, or is? And have they come?
Yeah, I think what staff suggested was a connection to that connects to the 50-foot easement. I think we have hesitation about that because candidly, the only potential connection is right in front of the property's pool, and you're crossing 3/4 of the property along private property to get there. But unfortunately, we don't have an appropriate offer, which is why I think it would be best if we could say that staff and the applicant would talk about it, but I don't have good language for you. I think we can say construction of a beach access, period. I just don't know how much of the connection we can get is my concern. We would prefer it if it just said connection of a beach access, period.
Right. No, I'm tracking that. On 4B, we had the beach easement of at least 15 feet wide. Is that?
That's fine.
You're agreed on that?
Yep.
Okay, perfect, great. I'm gonna verify.
Okay, so then we need 2 motions?
And we're also, I believe the city wanted this to be inclusive of staff recommendations, is that, okay.
That would be for the second motion, right? Correct?
This one is for the resolution.
Right. So the first motion should be in regards to ordinance 2024-03.
7. 7, right?
Am I?
03 is the one we
Correct,
did
yeah,
earlier
7.
for the townhouses.
Okay.
Okay, I'll motion to approve ordinance 2024-07.
I'll second that.
Roll call, please.
Member Grocott?
Yes?
Member Ray?
Yes.
Member Perry?
Yes.
Vice Chair Angelides?
Yes.
Chair Hubbard?
Yes.
Motion carries.
And now we need the motion for approval of 2024-08.
So I want to make sure I word this correctly. I make a motion for approval of resolution 2024-08 with staff recommended,
Inclusive of staff recommendations.
yeah, with inclusive of staff recommendations.
And do we need to redefine that this is including the conditions we just discussed? Okay.
So it would be
Would those
conditions
be-
as amended? Would that be proper? Conditions as amended?
Or
Okay.
would those be planning board recommendations?
Well, we're acting as both right
Okay.
now. So.
So let me reword that. Make a motion to recommend approval of resolution 2024-08 with amended recommendations.
Do I have a second?
I'll second. Yep.
Roll call, please.
Member Ray?
Yes.
Member Perry?
Yes.
Vice Chair Angelides?
Yes.
Member Grocott?
Yes.
Chair Hubbard?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you for working through those with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Do we need to-
Okay, so are we adjourning as the LPA now and
Correct. And
taking
then
up
go to
discussion items? Okay.
items.
All right.
So we will now adjourn as the LPA and reconvene as the planning board. And we've got,
You guys should have hats.
I think every discussion item was mine, so I'll
Bring out a new sign.
just start. Okay, so back in May, when we had 3 different members, I had asked if the board was amenable to my acting as a liaison to the city, the commission, and third parties, such as this contractor that's been hired, to just to basically to nag and encourage movement on our duties as the planning board to perfect the comprehensive plan and land development code. So since we've had 3 out of 5 board members change, I just wanted to see if everyone was amenable to my continuing to act in that role. I'm not expressing opinions on your behalf. I'm just there to basically lobby the commission and the city to move things forward on ways we would want to see.
I still think that's great. Yeah.
Okay.
Considering you're now in the chair position versus a committee person, I might recommend, I think that we should consider having maybe one of the non-chair people take that liaison role. I don't, what does the city think?
Well, I think in other boards, the chair is the person that typically will come up.
Okay.
And, again, not speak on behalf, but there to do what's in the best interest of what his role is as chair. I'm thinking of Historic Preservation Board, and it was asked for that chair to come to commission and be present when they were talking things related to,
Absolutely, if
So,
they're
yeah.
requested to come.
but not speaking on behalf of the board. So it would be up to you guys how you want to.
The question that I have, and I think in my mind, David has the most experience to do this right now, but we aren't allowed to talk to each other offline, and so how do we get the board's collective thoughts? I mean, it's wonderful to have a representative, but how do we get the board's collective thoughts? Do we have to have workshops, or what do we need to do so that we don't break the sunshine laws, but we can still all have input into that very important?
My understanding is I can communicate through the clerk to distribute to the rest of the board and vice versa. Is that accurate?
If you want to provide us with a list of things that you're going to speak about, we can provide that to the other members.
Okay. In most cases, this is not a discussion of specifics that would come before the commission or the board. I'm basically just wanting to go and say, you know, here's where we're at. We would like to see action on these things that come out of our meetings. So it's not an expression of opinion on things, on work items that are coming before that entity. It's just a, you know, let's keep it moving, that type of lobbying for the board.
But as board members, we all have the opportunity to do that with the commissioners. So you're not,
City staff.
or city staff, so you're not recommending that any one of us isn't also available to
No,
do
no,
that.
I'm not
So-
recommending that. This actually came from a prior discussion with the city attorney where I had asked if it was appropriate and permitted for me to go before the board as either, or the commission as either a board member or a private citizen to lobby in this way, and their suggestion was it would be preferable to have the planning board agree to my doing that rather than me doing that on my own. So this was guidance the city attorney had given me.
Okay. I'd like to talk about it with my commissioner a little bit.
Okay.
Before moving forward with a motion on it, if that's okay, and so we can reconvene on a decision.
Okay.
Again, I think if the commission is asking for the planning board to come to them with something, then that would be you. You're clearly the head. Or when we have workshops or combined boards, that, that's very, but I certainly in no way want to necessarily limit any one person, board member's ability to talk to city staff or commissions or.
Yeah, not at all. Yeah, the discussion with the attorney was just, they felt if I went before the commission on behalf of the board to say, where are we at with the comp plan review process? What are we doing with the contractor? The planning board would really like to see some activity that would carry more weight coming from me representing the board versus me showing up to say the same exact thing.
Yeah, and I understand that if we
Okay.
go in front of commission, we have to we clearly have to state whether we're there as a private citizen speaking or whether we're there as a member of the planning board speaking. So
Okay.
I just don't want to necessarily limit anybody's ability to
Sure.
make that option to go to the commission and say, no, I'm speaking as a member of the planning board
Okay.
necessarily. So let me just talk to my commissioner about it, please.
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
we
not a
can-
problem. My next item was just to ask staff to advise us on that current state of the comp plan. It sounds like it's been executed, but we're not at the point of defining statement of work.
I'm not overseeing that.
It went to the city commission last Monday with the planning board's recommendations. Of course, we've had some turnover on members, but it was approved effectively as presented. We didn't have any major changes that were proposed. Now, a week from today, we will be having a discussion with the commission and land use attorney regarding a potential moratorium on development. It was made clear to the city commission by the city manager that the scope of work may change based on potentially the recommendations for the moratorium if one is made. So there could be further changes. If those are made, I'll make sure to keep the planning board informed. But we are somewhat pending that just to see where we're moving forward before we actually execute a contract.
Okay, so it would be premature for us to start working with the consultant, given the fact that the city commission could change the scope
I think
possibly radically.
I think we might want to wait just till next week. I have reached out to I'm about to reach out to the consultant, but I don't, do we want to wait another week on that?
I haven't been involved in the conversations
Okay.
as of late, so.
Next question was,
Can I ask a question on that? And as it stands now, that scope of work is large resort district and Corey, or downtown, I don't know the exact verbiage of
DC1, DC2.
DC one, and those are the left and right parameters as it stands right now? Okay.
Yes.
the next question was, what are the next steps on the changes the Historic Preservation Board recommended? Where does it go from here?
We took your feedback, which we really appreciate, by the way. I know that was a lot of content to get through in a very short period of time. So I have your recommendations from the workshop. I'm going to make those changes. The 8th, I believe, is going to be a joint workshop between the Historic Board and the City Commission.
Yep,
So
October 8th at 4 o'clock.
So that workshop, the outcome of that is the City Commission decides next steps if they want to go forward with that change.
Correct. So from there, we would likely bring it back to the planning board for a vote.
Okay. Okay. Let's see. I think that's all I have. Yeah. Thank you. All right. I think we've concluded everything on the schedule. If no one has anything else, we can have a motion to adjourn.
I motion we adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Roll call, please. Or do we just adjourn? All right. Meeting is adjourned.
All right.
Thank you.